Log on, tune in, find out. Another good idea from Cambridge.
Well, it's a real privilege to have Professor Jurgen Moltmann here with us today. He's come in from Germany. I'm not going to tell you about him because he's going to tell you about himself. That's the main topic of this talk, From Physics to Theology, a Personal Story. So I'm going to leave him to do that. But I will say that through the 20th century, I think he's probably one of the most influential theologians there have been. And he's written books which many of us will be familiar with, books like Theology of Hope and The Crucified God. And he came back to that topic in Theology of Hope on the Ground and the Implications of a Christian Eschatology more recently. So you can judge how much of that came out of his life experiences, but I suspect that quite a lot of it did. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you, Professor Moltmann, for coming. I'll hand the floor over to you now. Thank you.
Well, thank you very much for your kind words of introduction. Right. And thank you very much for the invitation to Britain. I can never resist an invitation to Britain and the reasons I'm going to talk about. My personal story, it's not because it is important or exemplary, but because it happened in this country. So in the first part of the lecture, I will tell my personal story, as far as I remember it. And in the second part, I will then deal with certain ethical and aesthetic dimensions of science. I was never a learned scientist. I was not even a student of physics. But science is for me a paradise lost. Chemistry, physics, and mathematics formed the dreamland of my youth. We were a young scientific community in school. We tried chemical experiments in hidden cellars. In rivalry with each other, we told us our newest findings in atomic physics. We were a group of schoolboys training their minds with science, not only to impress our teachers. It was a wonderful time of the awakening spirit to discover the truth and the beauty of nature. The end came early. In 1943, just while I was reading the new book of the French scientist Louis de Broglie on matter and light, published in German with a long foreword of Werner Heisenberg, I was called up and conscripted into the German army. I was 16 years old. In Hamburg, the school classes were distributed to the anti-aircraft batteries of the city. We were made into Luftwaffenhelfer, Air Force auxiliaries. I was sent to a battery in Schwanenwijk that stood on stilts on the Hamburg largest lake, the Outer Ulster, probably so as to have a wide firing range in all directions, but also very visible from above. We felt already as soldiers. Teachers, however, came during the day and taught overtired warriors who had been on the alert during the night. And here a teacher of mathematics, Dr. Magin, found me. I shall never forget him. He was only interested in interested students and didn't care for the rest of the school class. My friend Gerhard Schopper and I became his devoted disciples. In July of 43, the Royal Air Force began the bombing of Hamburg. week, more than hundreds of bomber squadrons were over the city. The eastern part of the city was completely destroyed. More than 30,000 people died in the firestorm. In the last night, our battery was bombed and destroyed. One bomb hit the platform where we were standing. A mass of splitters destroyed the firing device and tore apart Gerhard Schopper, who was standing next to me. He hadn't got down quickly enough. I stood up blinded and deaf, only lightly wounded. During that night, I cried out for the first time to God. My God, where are you? Where is God? In a hell like this. Afterwards, the other question tortured me. Why am I not dead, too, like the friend at my side? Why must I live? I came from a secular family and was not religious, but in that night of horror and death, my wrestling with God began. It was the so-called Operation Gomorrah. That was the name the biblically versed Air Force commanders had given their planned destruction of the first big city in Germany. When we heard this, we were horrified until we realized that in the Nazi period, more than 30,000 victims were put to death in the Neuengamme concentration camp near Hamburg, and that thousands of Hamburg Jews were murdered on the fields of White Russia. Hamburg was not an innocent city. As a survivor of Gomorrah, I am a survivor of these Hamburg moral catastrophes too, and feel guilty and in duty bound to the dead because of my survival. In my younger years, I wanted to become a scientist. After 5 years of war and captivity, I came back as a theologian. The question about God became more important to me, but the questions about the scientific truth has remained with me ever since. I shall tell now my way to theology because I am indebted to Britain for this way. In the second part, I shall deal then with the slogan, knowledge is power, and with truth is beautiful, and with knowledge is wisdom, and wisdom is the ethics of science. In conclusion, I shall deal with the question, how far does the responsibility of the scientific community go in war and peace questions of our nations and in life and death questions of humankind. So, first, my long way to theology, my personal way to theology was a way through prisoner of war camps in this country. I was drafted in 1944 to the German infantry. Only shortly and poorly trained, we were sent to the Netherlands in September of 1944. British airborne troops landed in Eindhoven and Arnhem. We were sent to stop them, but were more the hunted ones than the hunters. In February of 1945, a British-Canadian operation through the Reichswald began. My unit was scattered. I lost my way at night in the woods and was alone until I met a group of British soldiers. I called, I surrender, and they didn't shoot me. On the next morning, a compassionate lieutenant gave me a plate of baked beans. Since that time, I love baked beans. A taste of life. My first prisoner of war camp was Zedelgem near Ostende in Belgium, but quite miserable. 200 men in an old ammunition shed, Nazi terror at night until the end of the war. Afterwards, cold desperation, most of German towns destroyed, 12 million displaced persons expelled from Silesia and East Prussia, and no personal news came through. We had escaped death, but we had lost all hope. The thought of there being no way out was like an iron band constricting the hearts. And each one of us tried to conceal his stricken heart behind an armor of untouchability. The worst, however, took place in one's soul. Every night, the nightmares of war, terror, and death returned. The faces of the dead appeared and looked at me with sightless eyes. Every night it was like a wrestling with the dark side of God. In those nights one was alone, like Jacob on Jabbok River, and fought with powers that seemed dark and dangerous. It was only afterwards and later that it became clear for me with whom I had been wrestling. It took 3 years at least before I found some healings for these dangerous memories. My spiritual nourishment had been Goethe's and Schiller's poems, very beautiful. I knew many of them by heart. They awakened and formed the emotions of the boy. But now, shut in with 200 others, they had nothing more to say to me. My dream of science cracked. What for is all of this? At a time I lost interest in life. All senses were closed. I had eyes but saw nothing. Ears, I heard nothing. Had emotions but I felt nothing anymore. Then something unforgettable happened to me in May of 1945, just after the war. We had to push a truck out of the camp, and all of a sudden I stood in front of a blossoming cherry tree. The full life looked at me. I almost fainted with the overwhelming joy of it. The spirit of life had touched me. In August of 1945, my name was called and we were taken to a ship in Ostende. The ship was not sailing to Hamburg, but to London. The next morning we passed Tower Bridge. By train we reached Scotland and ended up in Kilmarnock Ayrshire. This was an old, well-equipped camp. Only 20 of us shared one Nissen hut. After a variety of jobs, I advanced to an interpreter of a working group on the streets of New Cumnock. The Scottish workers and their families were the first who came into friendly contact with us. They met us, their former enemies, with a hospitality that profoundly shamed us. We heard no reproaches, we were not blamed. We experienced a simple solidarity and a warm common humanity. And this was for me quite overwhelming. True, we had numbers on our backs and prisoners' patches on our trousers, but we felt accepted. The humanity in far-off Scotland made human beings of us once more. We were able to love again. In September of 45, we were confronted in the camp with pictures of Bergen-Belsen and Buchenwald concentration camps. They were pinned up in a hut with only laconic commentaries. Some of us thought it was just English propaganda. Others set the piles of dead bodies over against the destruction of German cities. But slowly and inexorably, the truth seeped into our consciousness, and we saw ourselves with the eyes of the Nazi victims. Was my generation the last to have been driven to death so that the concentration camp murderers could go on killing people? For me, every patriotic feeling for Germany, Holy Fatherland, collapsed. Depression over wartime destructions and a captivity with no end in sight was compounded by a feeling of profound shame and having to share in shouldering the disgrace of one's own people. Where one day a well-meaning British army chaplain came to our camp and after a brief address distributed some Bibles. I read in the book in the evening without much interest until I came upon the Psalms of Lament in the Old Testament. Psalm 39 catched my attention particularly, and at first I quote, I am dumb and must eat up my suffering within myself. My life is nothing before thee. Hear my prayer, O Lord, and give ear to my cry. Hold not thy peace at my tears, for I am a stranger with thee, a sojourner, as all my fathers were. That was an echo from my own soul, and it called my soul to God. I didn't experience any sudden illumination or conversion, but I came back to these words every evening. Then I read Mark's Gospel as a whole and came to the story of Passion. And when I heard Jesus' death cry, my God, why hast thou forsaken me? I felt growing in me the conviction there is someone who understands you, who is with you in your crying to God, and who felt the same forsakenness you are living in now. I began to understand the forsaken Christ because I knew he understood me, the divine brother in need, the companion on the way who goes with you through this valley of the shadow of death, the fellow sufferer who carries you with your pain. And with this I summoned up the courage to live again, and was slowly but surely seized by a great hope for God's wide space where there's no cramping anymore. This perception of Jesus did not come suddenly and overnight, but it became more and more important for me. I read the Passion story of Christ again and again and discovered my own little life story in his great story. In summer 46, I realized that for me, the captivity was going to last longer than I had thought. I had come into captivity late and would be released later. I heard about an education camp in England where so-called baby prisoners, as I was called at that time, could repeat their final school examination that was required by universities. This possibility really exists in the British camp culture. I applied, passed an English language test, and guarded by a soldier with a rifle, I was put on a train and traveled through sunny and so peaceful England to Norton Camp in Cockney, near Mansfield in Nottinghamshire. romantically situated in the park of the Duke of Portland. It was a camp intended to train teachers and pastors for post-war Germany, set up by the British YMCA, financed by an American businessman, John Barwick, guarded by the British Army, of course. Norton Camp was England's generous gift to German prisoners of war. For us, this camp was a kind of enclosed monastic existence, excluded from time and world. The day began at 6:30 with a bugle reveille and ended at 10:30 p.m. when the lights were put out. At once we had plenty of time and stood intellectually completely famished as we were before a rich library put together by the YMCA and the prisoner aid of the World Council of Churches in Geneva. At that time, I read everything I could lay hands on: poems, novels, mathematics, philosophy, and any amount of theology, and that literally from morning to night. My first theological book was Reinhold Niebuhr, Nature and Destiny of Man, which, as far as I remember, impressed me deeply, also I hardly understood. Many international visitors came. We heard John Mott, Wisserthof, Martin Niemöller, among others. And we had some imprisoned professors of theology who taught imprisoned students of theology free theology. I never had again lived so intense an intellectual life as I did in Norton Camp. We received what we had not deserved and lived from a spiritual abundance we had not expected. A special event which completely turned my life upside down was the first international SCM conference after the war, which was held in Swanwick, Derbyshire, in summer of 1947. A group of POWs were invited to attend, I being one of them. We arrived with fear and trembling. What were we to say about wartime horrors and the mass murder in the concentration camps? But we were welcomed as brothers in Christ and could eat and drink and pray and sing with young Christians from all over the world. To be accepted like that was a wonderful experience for depressed prisoners of war. But then a Dutch student group came and wanted to speak to us officially. They told us that Jesus Christ is a bridge on which they were coming to meet us, and that without Christ they would not be able to speak to Germans. They told us about the Gestapo terror in their country, about the murder of their Jewish friends, and about the destructions of their houses by German occupants. And we too could step on this bridge which Christ had built from them to us, even if only hesitantly at first, could confess the guilt of our people and ask for forgiveness. At the end, we all embraced. I could breathe freely again, and much important, I knew what I was going to do, theology. In April of 48, I came home with one of the last transports. I was discharged after 5 years in barracks, trenches, and camps, but I had experienced something that was determined my whole life. For that reason, this time is for me so important that I would not have missed a day of it. what looked at the beginning like a grim fate became an undeserved blessing. It began in the darkness of war, and when I came to Norton Camp, the sun rose. We came with severely wounded souls, and we went away. My soul was healed. When we, those of us who survived, after 50 years returned to England in 1995, we visited the old place of Norton Camp again. The missing huts had disappeared, but the great old oak trees were standing there and remained. We remembered the people who at that time after the war met us with forgiveness and reconciliation, and we thanked God with hymns. The camp's old commanding officer, Major Bolton, said the same thing more dryly. He said, "I never heard before that prisoners returned to their of their free will to their prison and praised God for what they had experienced there." But that was just what we were doing with great joy. I change now to the second part of the lecture. In the second part, I shall turn now to the human, more exactly the personal dimensions of science. Because what brought me from physics to theology were the human questions of suffering and death, of guilt and forgiveness, in short, the God question. The question about God and the question of what holds nature together in its innermost being, as Goethe put it, are not wholly divergent questions. They are not even controversial. I believe they belong together, and whoever separates them is damaging both. According to Plato, wonder is the beginning of all knowledge, and truth is beautiful. According to the Jewish Christian tradition, the fear of God is the beginning of all wisdom. If wonder over the phenomena of nature converges with a reverence before the great mystery of the whole, the outcome is a humble search for truth and the unending joy in its discoveries of truth. My first point is knowledge is power. This is Macht. This was written on popular scientific journals in my youth, to say that science is a method of seizing power over nature. With science and technology, man will become lord and owner of nature, as René Descartes promised in his book on method. This promise, in fact, was fulfilled in the scientific technological civilization in the 19th century. Is this atheistic? No. This is religion, motivated by the Jewish Christian creation story and by explained by modern theology. Francis Bacon, the author of this slogan, knowledge is power, wissen ist Macht, saw in the power over nature the redemption of humankind from the fall of sin and the liberation from the following dependencies on nature. The goal of scientific eradication of nature was, I quote, the restitution and reinvesting in great part of man for the sovereignty and power which he had in his first state of creation. Man was created in the image of God and called to rule over the earth, subdue the earth, and have dominion over the animals. So the more man's rule over nature is growing, the more he is becoming again an image of God. Because God is the almighty ruler of the world. His human image must become the mighty ruler of the earth. So knowledge is power, and power is divine. Winning power was and is a modern motif for the exploration of nature, but as we all know, a very dangerous one. The 20th century saw a politicization of science. Fascist and communist ideologies occupied the sciences. The 20th century saw the militarization of science during 2 world wars and in the Cold War afterwards. The 21st century brought us the economization of science. Knowledge is not only power, but profit as well. These interests are alienating pure science from nature. Do we want to know nature for its own sake, seeking truth, and to correspond with nature and find common life with nature? If this is the case, sciences are better preserved in fellowship with theology than in service of politics, economy, and the military. One may also continue reading the Bible after chapter 1 of Genesis. According to chapter 1 Genesis, the human being has to subdue the earth. But according to Genesis 2, the human beings are taken from the earth, and dying, they will return to the dust. They are not divine lords of the earth, but children of the earth. The earth is not their subject, but their mother. Who can subdue his mother? Rock or sell his mother? In the great dramatic picture of creation in Job 38 to 40, the human being is very small and insignificant in front of God's immense and wild creation. Where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Can you bind the sweet influences of the Pleiades, or loose the bands of Orion? And Job answers, I am too insignificant. What shall I answer? This is the answer of human wisdom. True knowledge presupposes cosmic humility, as Richard Dawkins maintained, not the arrogance of power, but cosmic humility. True science is bound to truth and is not for sale. The second part is the aesthetic dimension. The truth is beautiful. I believe the aesthetic dimension is essential for pure science. Where there is truth, beauty is also present. Because beauty is a splendor of truth. Since ancient times, truth and beauty were seen together. Pulchritudo est splendor veritatis. Beauty is a splendor of the truth. And in his history of science, beauty was taken as a sign that truth is near, or you are near the truth. Is this only an old romantic glorification of science, or is beauty still a concomitant to every truth-seeking scientific community? Well, as far as I remember, in classic modern physics, the beauty of truth was discovered in the symmetries and the order of geometrical figures. The Euclidic geometry was for Johann Kepler the archetype of beauty. He developed a theory of the harmonia mundi out of the discovered symmetries of the constellations of the stars on the firmament. Another sign of truth is simplicity. Simplex sigillum veri. Simplicity is a seal of truth. The simple is clear and distinct. Next to simplicity, unity is a sign of truth. This principle was important for Isaac Newton. Why? Because a reconciliation of different aspects and the unification of various theories were considered a sign of stability. And stability and consistency were counted as signs of the faithfulness of the creator of the universe and the unity of God's creation. Many scientists of modern physics are on the way to find the unified world formula. The way may be the unification of different theories, for example, the general theory of relativity and quantum physics. One may also try to unify different theories by discovering common symmetries or resonances to each other. The concept of beauty in classic physics reminds us of Plotinus' famous sentence, "Beauty is a shining through of the eternal splendor of the one in the many material phenomena." Beauty is also at stake in modern post-classic physics of complex systems in sciences and in sciences that use morphology. This is the beauty of forms and figures. Fractal geometry is revealing a world full of beauty, confessed its founder Benoit Mandelbrot. A world full of beauty. And when we understand the cosmos as a universe, open-ended process, and see the emergence of the new in time, we can discover a dynamic concept of beauty. The splendor of truth is shining not only in timeless symmetries, but also in symmetry breaking off transformations. The becoming and passing away of temporal forms are beautiful signs of life. The German scientist Friedrich Kramer, well known for his theory of resonance and his tree of time in the Symphony of the Living, stated, "What we call beauty does belong neither to pure order nor to pure chaos. Beauty is revealed where chaos is flowing into order or order into chaos." What I want to say with these few remarks on the connection between science and aesthetics is this: beauty is still a sign of truth. And this is important for any truth-seeking community, as John Polkinghorne names the scientific community, the truth-seeking community. Beauty is not a fancy of personal taste, and you can't dispute about taste. Beauty is part and sign of the self-revealing of truth discovered by every good discovery. This beauty may be useless, but it is most meaningful in itself. What one can't say of all technical, political, or military utilizations of scientific discoveries. Scientists may be proud upon their joy at the beauty of their discoveries and their knowledge and their theories. Already Confucius said, better than knowing the truth is loving the truth. And better than loving the truth is rejoicing in truth. And with this I come to my last point. Knowledge is wisdom. We humans are part of the earth, and the earth is not a meaningless accumulation of matter and energy, but an ecological system with a long history or a long evolution. More like an organism than a mechanism, more alive than a dead object. The Earth's organism is a subject of its own rights. The Earth brings forth life, living creatures. This is said in Genesis 1:24, and it is only said of the Earth. Only the Earth is creative, bringing forth life. Not even the human beings are full of this creativity. Well, at a certain point of the evolution of the Earth began to feel, to think, to become conscious of itself, and to sense reverence, as Leonardo Boff said. And with this, mankind appeared on the theater. We therefore don't stand over against the earth to subdue her. We are in whatever we recognize or do or can do parts of the earth community. This cosmic community is much wider than the parts of nature we can see and discover and can control. Science becomes wisdom wherever we integrate ourselves into the Earth community and into the greater cosmic community. And now my last point, wisdom is the ethics of science. Wisdom doesn't come from experiences we have made, but from the way we deal with our experiences. It is not yet perception by itself that makes us wise. It is the perceiving of the perception. When we make a conscience of science and of what we know, the ethics of knowledge emerges. We look ourselves, so to speak, over the shoulder, asking, what are you doing there? Is this good or evil? Does it serve life or death? For scientists in the 20th century, it was a question, do we serve peace or war? We can see the dilemmas involved if we look at two outstanding personalities, Albert Einstein and Fritz Haber. Einstein, his discovery of the general theory of relativity in 1907 was, as he confessed, the happiest thought in my life. Its proof, 1915, through the predicted movement of Mercury, convinced him, as he said, that nature had spoken to him. The outbreak of the Second World War in 1939 raised the fateful question: the atomic bomb in Hitler's Germany or in Western democracies? Einstein made his decision and wrote his famous letter to President Roosevelt. The Manhattan Project began and led to the destruction of Hiroshima in August of 1945. With this, World War II ended, and the nuclear end time of humankind began. Einstein became a consequent pacifist. Abolish war. And as far as I know, the Russian scientist Sakharov, who made the hydrogen bomb, ended up with the abolition of war. Absolutely. The second personality is Fritz Haber. He was a famous German chemist and Nobel Prize winner. And his discovery how to isolate hydrogen from the atmosphere made it possible to produce artificial fertilizers in peacetime and ammunition in war. During World War I, it was Haber's chemical discoveries that made the German poison gas war possible. For this, Haber was ostracized by the international scientific community after the war. The commandment of his scientific ethics was very simple and clear to him. In peace, I work for humanity. In war, I work for the fatherland. His love for the fatherland has, however, its limits. When the Nazis took over his fatherland in 1933, he refused any further collaboration. How far does the responsibility of scientists for their scientific research go? For their results, or even for what others make of their results? In 1957, leading German nuclear physicists recognized this responsibility. In an official declaration, they refused to cooperate in the nuclear rearmament of Germany, much to the annoyed frustration of leading politicians. Of course, this responsibility is not restricted to scientists and technicians concerned. It is the responsibility of all the citizens of a society. Scientists share this political responsibility in their special way. And if the whole of the human race is threatened by a nuclear or an ecological or an economic disaster, the responsibility rests on all human beings. To come to the end, today the first power formula is in the hands of scientists. The second formula for the ethical power of humankind over the physical power is still underdeveloped. The last centuries have brought such an enormous increase of scientific knowledge and technological power that we need, and in the immediate future, a still greater increase in wisdom, in the wisdom dealings with what we know and can, what we should do and what we better do not do. Wisdom is a love of life and the courage to be. Truth is what we seek in science and spirituality, and the beauty of both may sometime redeem the world. Thank you.
We've got time for some questions or comments if people would like to make any. I think there's a couple of people with microphones, so do use those so that everybody can hear. There's one right by the microphone, so that's a good place to start.
Thank you. Thank you, Professor Moltmann, for a fascinating lecture. I think the question I would want to ask is, you've talked about the question of the responsibility of the scientist as to what people do with the results of what people discover. But doesn't that also apply, for instance, to the theologian or to the philosopher? Isn't there the same responsibility that ideas can be used for good or for ill? And then how do the two relate to each other?
Well, the same responsibility, but on different fields and with different subjects. This is quite clear.
But could one learn from the other? Or what would a good structure,
Yes, if we
dialogue look like?
Begin to share the problems of the other and listen to their consciences, I think we should not let alone scientists who see what can be done in political and military use of their discoveries. We should share their responsibility, and the outcome of atomic physics and the atomic and the hydrogen bomb is indeed the strict abolition of war. I think Einstein found his way, and Sakharov found his way, and we should listen to them because they see better the danger than a philosopher or a theologian can do.
It's a great privilege, Professor Moltmann. I'm from South Africa, and as a little boy I grew up to see the injustice and evil of apartheid. We did one of your books in post-apartheid, which really meant a lot to our students. My question would be related to the complexity surrounding evil and how we should think about that in light of beauty and chaos, chaos in beauty. We are integrated into the cosmic universe. What do we do with radical evil in that scheme?
Lots of fun.
Do you want 2 hours? The problem of evil as such? No. To build up the good. You can fight evil only with the good.
But is God taken up into evil, like some panentheisms would say, that God is in a sense part of the evil that is done by apartheid and by other wars? Is God part of that, or is he separate from that?
I have problems to understand you.
Yes, you heard what he said. Is God part of the evil in things like apartheid and so on, or is he separate from it? Is that correct?
No, in my opinion, God is suffering from the evil of the Nazi time and of apartheid and whatever we do in evil terms on earth. God is suffering under it.
Dave, down here they've got Reverend. Oh, are you pointing up there? Yes. I didn't look behind me. Okay. Has somebody got a question down here while the microphone goes? Let's have one question here, and the microphone will make its way.
Thank you very much for what you said to us. I was wondering, in the light of evolutionary science and the truths of that, and holding together the truth of a resurrection life now, as you speak often about, I wonder how Christians can what is the most reasonable way that we should think of the fall?
The fall.
Don't fall, stand up. If there was a fall of sin at the beginning, we should not try to find the reasons for it, but to overcome it and stand up. And the resurrection of Christ is a strong sign for standing up and live a life according to God and not against God. We should not look back to explain evil. We should look forward to overcome evil. At least this is what Jesus said to the blind, born young man. Did his parents sin, or did he sin? No. He is there that the mighty wonder of God will appear and be revealed. So this is the answer to sickness is healing. The answer to the fall of sin is to stand up in the power of the Spirit.
You were talking about the connection between beauty and truth. And I was wondering if beauty is a hallmark of truth, and if we recognize truth by it being beautiful, could that be because we are biased towards seeing things that are beautiful as truth? So could it be that because things that are simple and because things that we see as beautiful seem more true to us, that these are the things that we pick out as truth? So while the truth that is out there isn't more beautiful, we see the truths that are beautiful and say truth is beautiful.
I have something against the subjectivization of truth and beauty. I followed the old Greek term that truth, the good, and the beauty belong together. So if you see something true, you ask, is this beauty? And is this good? And the three questions, the truth question, the beauty question, and the question of good and evil belong together. They were separated only in the beginning of the 17th century when science wanted to get rid of this company with ethics and aesthetics. But I think the aesthetic dimension, at least, is still in the scientific discovery. Otherwise, it would you would not enjoy science.
Yes, you can often see the truth of mathematical theories by their beauty, can't you? Yes, that's the question.
Thank you. Hello. I want to ask, what do you think when scientists use beauty as a measure to pursue research that might not necessarily have empirical relevance? So I have, for example, the unification of quantum theory and relativity. It is more based on the motivation of unity rather than any experimental evidence, and that itself is an example of how scientists use beauty as a standard to pursue their investigation, which might not necessarily be fruitful. So what is your view on that?
Well, as I developed, unity is one of the classical physics demands of beauty. And if you see the world in an open-ended process, if you apply process philosophy, then it's more the changing symmetries breaking off and new symmetries emerging, and you see you have then a more dynamic concept of beauty, not the static concept of symmetry. And this is a development in aesthetics and a development in physics.
But I think my question is more that, don't you think it is possible that we are misled by beauty? Can you explain?
He was asking whether we can be misled by pursuing beauty. Is that correct?
Yes.
Rather than
No,
truth, we set it aside.
We are seeking truth and we discover beauty. We are not seeking beauty and then discover truth. The truth question is the leading question, from my understanding.
Thank you. I'll take the question that was asked now a bit further, but from the theological perspective. If beauty and truth belong together, how can we construct a theological statement without falling into wishful thinking or self-deception, if I can say?
Well, in theology, a theological sentence or statement must be also used in doxology. That is the praise of the beauty and die Herrlichkeit, the clearness of God. And therefore theology has truth and beauty always together. Doxology is a core of theology. And whatever you teach about God, you must also say to God. If you can't say to God what you are teaching about God, then you are on the wrong way. This is a very simple regulation.
If you allow me to give an example, just to explain my point. An example, if Christ is risen, did Jesus rise from the dead, or do I want him to rise from the dead because I want to have hope in life after death? This is an example. Because the methodology of investigating the resurrection will be different here. How would I know that Christ is risen, for instance?
There are dimensions of resurrection which are contrary to your visual thinking. You would never wish to be confronted with the victims of your people. And they will be raised first, the victims of injustice and violence. And this is against wishful thinking. If you would follow wishful thinking, you should go to the consumer paradise, but not into a church.
I think we'll take one last question and then we've worked on very long.
Could you say something about research at or beyond the edges of science when we try to apply the scientific method to things like the efficiency of prayer?
Can we apply scientific research to, I suppose, the theological questions like the efficiency of prayer?
We tried to. I'd be interested to hear.
Is it a topic of research?
Each faculty has its own criteria for truth and for bicycle and ask whether prayer is as efficient as your bicycle is, then you are misled. The truth in prayer is different, it's a special one, and the truth with cause and effect is another one. Normally, preachers say that prayer is not a question and answer automat with God, where you put in the prayer and then you get the result the next day out of it. But we should formulate our own understanding of what truth is in theology and in science and in the law school, for example, and then try to bring these theories together to see resonances and symmetries and come slowly to a university again. Our universities are separated into different schools, and another school can be added and one school can be left out. There is no university anymore. Universities, at least in Germany. And so we should work together from faculty to build up a university of truth and the good and the beauty.
So let's thank you very much.